Welcome to Mountain Connect 2020. My name is Gil Gonzales. I'm with the Gonzales Group LLC here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm here to talk a little bit about a public-private partnership between Sacred Wind Communications and Navajo Tech University. I want to start off by saying that Navajo Tech University and Sacred Wind have been working together for several years. There have been strong collaborators in trying to build out capacity and services to the Navajo community, particularly in Eastern Navajo. Eastern Navajo is one of those locations on the Navajo reservation where it's subject to what they call checkerboard land use. So it's very difficult to get right-of-ways and getting difficult to get services out to various locations in very isolated parts of the community. There are many parts of Navajo, as you probably know, that don't have running water or electricity. So in this condition, these environments, Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind have been working together for several years to try to work on ways in which they can connect Navajos in places where they have very few options, if any at all. So let me start by telling you a little bit about Navajo Tech. It started out as a technical school, as you might expect, in 1979, and it was eventually awarded the university status in 2013. It's one of the few research universities on the Navajo Nation. It's got about 1,800 students. It specializes in areas such as advanced manufacturing, culinary arts, as well as information technology. They really have an open door policy to inviting all students across the country, with a special emphasis in doing what they call inviting the Diné philosophy, which is about using Navajo language, culture, and history and kind of folding it into the academic programs. One example of their efforts to try to build out capacity and take a step forward in delivering connectivity to the Navajo Nation included a project started in 2008 called Internet to the Hogan. That was a project that we were working with the University of New Mexico to build out microwave, as well as beginning to look at alternative forms of wireless to connect Navajo. Well, we're getting to that point as well. The other thing you should know about Navajo Tech University is they are very active with the National Science Foundation. They're awardees of two cyber infrastructure proposals, both of them to do a couple things. One is improve external connectivity, build capacity on campus, support science, and do something that's called advance the or resolve the issues around the homework gap. This is all pre-COVID, so you can imagine that solving the homework gap in a year ago was something that was important to NSF and important to Navajo Tech, where now it pretty much is the only thing. It's one of the major components of doing work on Navajo and other tribal entities around the country. The second organization in this partnership is Sacred Wind Communication, which was established in 2006. Sacred Wind is one of the few privately owned CLECs in the area. They're one of the 4 ATCs on Navajo. John Badal, who's been leading that organization since its inception, has a strong commitment, strong relationship with trying to reduce the digital divide on Navajo and other places. They have some services located in Eastern Navajo and in Eastern New Mexico. This is a way for them to continue to expand capacity in these areas, use existing resources, and again, hopefully make a difference in the by working with some of the higher education institutions on Navajo. And by the way, they're probably one of the recipients of the upcoming 2.5 gigahertz EBS spectrum authorization coming out of the Navajo Nation Regulatory Commission. So they're going to be an active player. This is a good start for Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind. So as you can imagine, you've probably been watching the national news. The Navajo Nation has been seized by the COVID-19 impact. Very large numbers of impacted Navajos and many deaths. There are shutdowns on the weekends. The President Nez has taken the administrative direction to do probably almost everything he probably could to reduce the expansion of the virus on Navajo. As I mentioned earlier, Navajo is a place where oftentimes generations of families are living together, so the infection possibility across these locations is significant. So to the extent that it's a place where getting better connectivity for schools and getting students access to academic programs where they can't travel the 2 hours on the bus to the school is something that's very important. So to that extent, there are, as I mentioned earlier, 4 ATCs that service Navajo Nation across 3 states. They have coverage in New Mexico, Arizona, and a small part of Utah. And it's about the size of West Virginia, so you can imagine the size of this very large reservation. So the demand for broadband has escalated to the near top of the requirements for the administration, right along with public safety and, of course, healthcare. And so broadband demand it's important not only to recognize that it's not something that can be delivered with one fell swoop. Not one carrier can probably do it reasonably well. So working together is an important option. So with the advent of the additional resources brought to Navajo through the CARES Act, Navajo Nation has been soliciting ideas, putting proposals together. Altogether, there's approximately $600 million that was assigned under CARES Act to Navajo, and that includes water projects and a bunch of other things. Of that, approximately 53 million was assigned to broadband in some general way, and included the idea that, in fact, the Navajos would be interested in going after the EBS 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, of which the auction we know is going to be extended from the time of this presentation. But nonetheless, the Navajo administrative organizations have decided to pursue that spectrum and make it available to the 4 ETCs for their use, and hopefully to improve the options and deliver services for broadband. I want to say here that Navajo Tech University has been actively involved with several strong advocate organizations, including MuralNet. MuralNet's helped with some pilot EBS and CBRS deployments. They've been very active in trying to support tribal entities and tribal universities across New Mexico and Arizona. And so what I'd like to say is that Navajo Tech has been putting up, and Diné College, the other university on Navajo, have had prior installations of these systems to begin to address that homework gap solution that, of course, walked directly into the COVID-19 environment that we're currently in right now. Sacred Wind has also been a strong advocate in the use of some of these technologies. They had introduced or began to introduce the use of white space and other alternative wireless. They're active in looking at other technologies to deliver and expand capacity out through their service areas. Nonetheless, the two partners, Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind, have been strong advocates for looking at alternatives, trying to work together. And this is the result of that work. There is a need to have new collaborators, new approaches to begin to address the immediate demands of COVID-19. And we know that we expect that to last at least another year, minimally at least. And then, of course, to look at what the future might be as new systems are brought in, new capacity brought into Navajo, and to decide what's the best way, in fact, tribal organizations and public and private organizations can work together to deliver those services. And so a little more background, and let me say that the Navajo Nation has been actively doing some broadband planning. Consulting group Magellan has been working with several groups on Navajo Nation to develop our broadband plan and to prepare legislation anticipation, recognizing that, of course, broadband is a critical service, recognized far more now than it was a year or so ago, but nonetheless an important part of what needs to happen in order to provide connectivity to students, teachers, community members, and so on, as well as businesses, of course. And so the ETCs have been working together as part of the request for CARES funding. And then recently, President Nez authorized about $15 million to be assigned to ETCs for their use. Another $52 million approximately has been used for other projects, including from their tribal authority. And then finally, there have been a very active E-rate group where there's a consortium of schools where they put together proposals to put fiber in place, costing approximately $53 million across many parts of the Navajo Nation. So the need to build new capacity, whether it's through E-rates or do fiber along water line construction, are all topics of active discussion. Those projects are either in the planning phases. They anticipate that it's going to improve Navajo in 3 to 5 years as new fiber construction is made available, as new collaborators may be brought in to extend fiber out inside of Navajo and to places like Albuquerque, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Los Angeles, and so on. So the future of getting capacity and collaboration and working in collaboration with the 4 ETCs as well as other public and private organizations is very positive for Navajo Nation. So in the meantime, the challenges are, what do we do until 3 years from now when fiber is made available? So the collaboration between Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind fits into this segment of the immediate need demands. In the various tribal council meetings, the tribal delegates have made it very clear that connectivity to what we call, or what they call, chapter houses or community centers is pretty near at the top of their list. So there's a lot of interesting activity in trying to get connectivity to places where Navajos will travel to, socialize, get legislative updates, work with their communities, as well as begin to look at what the short term looks like, while everything else is happening. And so the two things I'll mention very briefly is there's been a lot of activity to build out external wireless or external Wi-Fi from these chapter houses if they have connectivity. Organizations, universities like Northern Arizona University and University of Arizona, for example, have been out on Navajo installing access points on external locations on these chapter houses and making them available to those who can drive up and be socially distant in order to get connectivity to everything from update machines, update the laptops, get phone service, charge devices, and so on. So the activity of building out Wi-Fi and trying to understand how the importance of it and how it can work longer term within Navajo is an absolutely critical function. Let me also say that the second part of this is that the higher ed institutions are now beginning to recognize that they've got to do some different kinds of planning. So Diné College and Navajo Tech are working on what many universities across the country are looking at, and they call micro campuses. These are locations where the chapter houses are turned into academic spaces. There's an additional capacity that's oftentimes needed, better Wi-Fi that might be needed, and also access to that facility. So between expanding Wi-Fi, working on micro campus planning, and then trying to deal with the implications of solutions that were not necessarily mature or working correctly, like MiFis. A lot of schools bought hundreds of MiFis. Some of them work well, some of them not so well, based on where people lived. So the challenge is now to begin to recognize that they need to be a little more comprehensive about coverage and support so that the students and faculty and employees and others can get access to connectivity when the technology is made available. So again, my closing point on this section is that in the background, we've got a lot of activity in Navajo in the next 3 to 5 years, could have new capacity on fiber through E-rate and other construction projects. Major water builds are going to create the opportunity for new arterials and fiber construction. There are short-term activities that are beginning to be stood up in order to support Navajo and tribal actions in order to remediate the problems of Wi-Fi and other wireless services. So in the meantime, these short-term projects being to work together is also an important need. Let me go ahead and talk now about a partnership. So these two organizations, as I mentioned, have been working together for years in Eastern Navajo. Eastern Navajo is a different place, as I mentioned, between the checkerboard land use problems and getting right-of-ways across checkerboard lands. But also it's about building something that might have a little more sustainability. So let me talk a little bit about that new partnership. So the project is funded from a CARES Act allocation requested by Navajo Tech and then directed towards Sacred Wind. It's a plan to introduce the use of EBS wireless in locations like Crownpoint and about 7 or 8 other locations across Navajo. The anticipated phase 1 project really started with about 50 to 70 homes. And the idea was to demonstrate that, in fact, the systems did work as we anticipated. The use of fixed wireless was going to be well understood, and that the billing practices and the beginning of negotiations of the service costs would be well understood. And as the CARES Act discussion continued, Navajo Tech decided to pursue a larger phase 2 project. So we started with 50 to 70 homes, and with additional resources and with additional support and consideration from Sacred Wind, the phase 2 project pushed the project up to about 400 homes. As many of you know, the CARES Act funding requirements require that services be delivered by the end of December 2020. We're confident with Sacred Wind that, of course, we're able to stand up services in Crownpoint and a few other locations and get it operational by December 2020. Some of the characteristics of this partnership. Navajo Tech had, as I mentioned earlier, as far back as 2008 through their Internet to the Hogan project, had been acquiring and standing up and using various tower locations across Navajo. And for those of you who know anything about Navajo Nation, there are hundreds of towers on Navajo Nation. Well, Navajo Tech had been acquiring several, so had Sacred Wind in their service area. So this is the first time we're going to be looking at sharing towers. We'll do the maintenance and the upkeep of towers that need a little attention, and put towers and services in place across a couple different locations that normally we wouldn't have access to. So sharing towers and sharing some of these other services is really an important part of the partnership. There are parts of the project that will involve some billing and working with customers. Navajo Tech is very interested through the enrollment management function, making information available to Sacred Wind to reach out to customers and trying to build that bridge into a service point, as well as understanding that at some point in time it has to be sustainable. So working through the budgetary and the business model portions of the project is also important. Navajo Tech is a university. They do have the ability to do billing. Sacred Wind probably does billing better than the university. So that's one of the areas that I know we'll be looking at as we go forward. The initial project, phase 1 and 2, are going to be deployed with the assistance of the Navajo Nation use of a special temporary authority licensing agreement with the FCC. We've requested the use of all 3 channels and the spectrum located in and around the tower. That's about 7 to 8 tower locations, as well as those in Crownpoint, New Mexico. The use of that special authority means it's temporary. We expect that the EBS license will be assigned to Navajo in general, and that we know that Sacred Wind is very actively pursuing access to that spectrum and that license as it goes forward. But as a pilot, it's using the STA, or Special Temporary Authority license. That allows us to run the project and make sure it's complete and operational, certainly by the end of December, but also the license stretches into January. So we know that several tribes around the country are getting notice, even as of today, about the receipt of the 2.5 gig licensing. We're hoping soon that Navajo will be one of those. And what this does is really expand what Navajo Tech's interest was in their Internet to the Hogan strategy. Is they really do need to have a way to connect to students and faculty, and do it in a way so that's slightly different than trying to buy from an existing carrier. In some cases, those students don't live where the carriers are made available. In some cases, faculty and research especially is being conducted and where the business case or the business model for a lot of locations on Navajo just doesn't make much sense. So this is a pilot project that will run. We expect it to run in operation for about 3 years. We think the 3-year window is going to be a satisfactory time frame in which to get the licensing corrected, as well as get the business model stood up. It's clear to Navajo Tech and clear to Sacred Wind that this could be, again, a very useful test case for how these collaborations can, again, help subsidize the projects as necessary, deliver services where it's important, and more importantly, continue the operations for a university that needs support in these areas. Well, so in this case, this is also an opportunity for Sacred Wind to deliver services where often, little exists, and in some cases, it's a new area for them. So getting access to the Navajo Tech towers is useful, putting capacity up on the towers that Sacred Wind has available. These are about pilot areas that we're not only looking at delivering UBS capacity, but also looking at how, in fact, new backhaul options can happen. There are small components of the project, for example, to put a small microwave between a couple towers and create new backhaul where none exists today. This is but a way for us to establish and be creative about how Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind can deliver services not only to tribal areas, but also areas that might be trust lands or be tribal areas that are not contiguously connected to the Navajo Nation. So it's as much a discussion about experimentation, service delivery, and the opportunity to work together in, again, ways in which we've done incidentally and now can be moved into more of a purposeful arrangement. I'll give an example of that. One of the major outcomes of the collaboration is to have some research and some experimentation done by Navajo Tech in collaboration with Sacred Wind. And the best example of that is that EBS makes available 3 channels in order to deliver capacity up to 100 meg, we expect, across these systems. experimenting how those channels, how channel capacity and channel utilization can be used to differentiate services for various aspects of NTU's requirements is a useful thing. So we're putting in everything from personar nodes and data collection methodologies, tools, and instruments into the system so we can measure the performance of these various EBS systems, endpoint systems, and then we can better understand what the service actually looks like. Being able to report back to places like the National Science Foundation for understanding how these systems work is a useful and constructive discussion to have with NSF and all of its collaborators, and to expand that into other research areas. Navajo Tech is also interested in placing science instrumentation on their facilities and in their locale. We're expecting to work with Sacred Wind to place the instrumentation locations in locations that makes good sense, not only support science, but also support the opportunity for Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind to continue to expand connectivity. So we mentioned a while back that Navajo Tech was interested in the homework gap. That's now become a very common phrase and common discussion for almost every one of these national projects. And the homework gap's important to Navajo. It's just incredibly important because not only are Navajo students not able to get to classes, it's that gap in academic engagement that's also a serious matter. So we think that between Sacred Wind and their interest in reducing digital divide and closing the homework gap, so in fact, not only are students in Navajo, but also surrounding Eastern New Mexico, which has some significant challenges as well, these projects can help Sacred Wind and other collaborators, school districts that are off Navajo, for example, to identify technical solutions and service solutions that can not only can expand the ways to resolve those problems and to expand connectivity where it's appropriate. So it's a good fit for Navajo Tech and Sacred Wind, not only to think differently about just delivering broadband services, but there are other aspects of the academic performance and measurement activity that's critically important. So we expect that these, the use of the towers, the use of underlying research capacity, collecting performance measurements and so on, it may not be necessarily what Sacred Wind wants to do with it initially, but in fact, that's the kind of model that Navajo Tech is interested in reporting back again to NSF. Of the 2 National Science Foundation grants that they've been awarded, this is a very important topic because it impacts all the tribes across the country, the 36 either tribal colleges, universities around the country. And we know that in fact, this is the kind of collaboration that we can get real results, real data, and to demonstrate how other TCUs, as they call themselves, might engage the private sector in their communities and how they might perform that or work with Sacred Wind to expand it. And then finally, these projects are really certainly starting with delivering broadband to a home and trying to get as close to FCC's 25.3 requirements. But it's also about building out other alternative wireless options and looking at experimentation on broadband as well. So Navajo Tech has a long interest and been working with, again, NSF about becoming a wireless test bed for all kinds of things. Sacred Wind's engagement and collaboration is something that's going to be really important. We think not only in the short term, but also in the long term. So I guess I mentioned we're looking at a collaboration that has about a slice of time of about 3 years. And then we expect to come back and kind of reiterate and continue to engage. It's clear to us that as I'm working with Sacred Wind and Navajo Tech on these types of collaborations, it's important to be flexible and understand that we're going to have some give and take. We think that by working with the private sector with the kind of the soul of supporting New Mexico and Eastern New Mexico and the tribes can make a huge difference in understanding what might be next. And of course, that includes new fiber projects, new alternative wireless outside of ABS, as well as looking at the types of services that can make a difference for those students and a difference for those residents of the Navajo itself. So this public-private partnership really is, it's about helping deliver broadband in this very small window between when we think E-rate and other major initiatives will put fiber in. It may be considered short-term, but it could also be long-term, since we understand that while there may be fiber to many of these, or up to 100, 110 chapter houses, we still need to get connectivity out to the Hogan or out to the residents of many of the Navajos. And also the Navajo Nation has as we've worked with Navajo Tech, has a strong interest on entrepreneurship and innovation. So delivering new capacity out to these locations is critically important. So the partnership between NTU brings in NTU's faculty, staffs, and students in ways in which they've not done before. And so building connectivity or building services that enable their one-to-one or laptop program, it's just as one example, is an important step forward in helping Navajo Tech deliver better capacity, better service to the students that need it wherever they happen to be, as well as begin to work with other Navajo higher education organization, Diné College. So we're starting with Navajo Tech. We believe that this is a model that'll be brought to other higher ed organizations on Navajo, and then also to other Navajo tribal colleges and universities as well. So, this is a partnership that's built on an MOU. It's taken some time to assemble it and make it so it actually has some compromises on both sides. We do expect to have services up and running by the end of December. We want to thank John Badal and the good folks at Sacred Wind who have expressed and committed their resources to make a huge difference, we think, on Navajo, and also to Dr. Elmer Guy and Jason Arviso at Navajo Tech, who also have stretched forward and recognized the importance of building new relationships, new partnerships to make a difference on Eastern Navajo. So with that, again, I think we're going to end the video and go to questions. And welcome again to Mountain Connect, and hoping to have a good conference, and we hope to have a good conversation. Thank you.